I started combining the most successful coup fighters that I came across in my work in 2020 with experts who had helped study or defeat autocracy internationally. So we went to places over the intervening years like Hungary. But we also looked at places like Poland, Brazil, Czech Republic, the country where I served as ambassador, where there were successful ousters in recent years of autocratic regimes. And we came together over that 4-year period with a plan. Do you know that there's twice as many protests in 2025 as there were in 2021?
My head was blowing up. I sent this to Steve. He's like, we got to do a 2-hour special on this. And of course, get Mike Benz. I'm curious your sort of reactions to Norm Eisen admitting that. An interview probably should be like evidence somewhere for some case.
It might end up being one day in the not too distant future. We're in a period of incredible transformative change right now within the United States of the structures that Norm Eisen has depended on for power, and to project as the sort of quarterback of this blob, the various instruments of blob power, from the courts to the streets with the protests, to the bureaucracy, to the funding mechanism of the U.S. budget. And I do want to read a passage actually from that Democracy Playbook. I'm proud to say that I think I was the first person to ever publish about the Democracy Playbook of Norm Eisen in 2019, when he was just coming onto the radar of this. I published in Revolver, together with Darren Beattie, kind of the definitive Norm Eisen piece, which ended up blowing up and I think putting much of this on the map. But this playbook is a very instructive, annually updated tool that's kind of a consensus building tool out of the Brookings Institution, which is known as the top-ranked think tank in the United States. It's not really a think tank at all. It is a blob consensus-building mechanism with very strange links to the U.S. intelligence apparatus, I should note. The CIA in the 1980s would send people to CIA agents to Brookings for training. Brookings has an intelligence and governance section. Norm Eisen himself was a State Department ambassador. The ambassadors play the coordinating role in a region with statecraft and intelligence. And I want to note that the 7 pillars that Norm Eisen describes in the 2025 playbook are controlling elections, controlling the courts, fighting corruption, basically, painting Trump as an autocrat, reinforcing civic and media space. That means a full court press on NGOs and so-called civil society organizations and control over the media. But Pillar 6 is very interesting because it's called controlling disinformation. And I want to read a passage from this section. He sort of bemoans the existence of the First Amendment in saying that federal action may be uncertain as Trump controls the executive branch, but that at the state level, state governments should try to pursue censorship policies. Of course, we saw this with the state of California trying to pass laws to go after X and force all sorts of transparency and accountability requirements on social media companies. We saw the same thing done in Michigan. But what Norm Eisen notes is that states may find partners in allied regulators over social media, such as the EU and Brazil. So this is Norm Eisen, as you heard in this clip, noting that he recruited people for his new Blob shop from folks who overturned basically regimes that he called autocratic, which of course he has to. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. All these people get paid to fight autocracy abroad through the State Department, USAID, the U.S. Institute of Peace, the Department of Defense, civil military. But the fact that Norm Eisen is telling states to go and work with the absolutely crooked, abjectly tyrannical censor state of Brazil to try to find allies between Democrat Party censorship activists in the United States and a foreign government which is putting tens of thousands of people in prison, which has banned by judicial edict President Bolsonaro from having a social media account, from having from participating in public interviews, from having those interviews shared on social media. That is who Norm Eisen and the Democrat Party are looking to as allies to commonly fight social media free speech. It's absolutely insane. But what I want to note here is we're at a time of change, and we are seeing declassifications now happening at breakneck pace. We saw the JFK files mass declassified. We saw the Martin Luther King files declassified. We saw the Crossfire Hurricane documents declassified. We saw the classified annex involving George Soros and Leonard Bernardo, who also, as you posted this clip, Natalie, if you recall, Leonard Bernardo, the clip that you posted, what was he myopically obsessed with? Stopping misinformation and disinformation, and how can we take on social media freedom? But the fact is you have these internal documents at the State Department and USAID and the U.S. Institute of Peace. And it is my hope, my dream, that we get USAID files. We get State Department Democracy, Rights, and Labor files. That's the group that Norm Eisen's crew works with within the State Department, this democracy money spigot. Labor involves the getting mass street muscle. What I found this week, and which I went over with in a private lecture, but I'll be posting later this week, are incredible riot training documents from the U.S. federal government to NGOs to help them organize the kind of street protests that Norm Eisen depends on in order to project political power artificially into a system where his own side has been outvoted. The U.S. Institute of Peace, for example, which Darren Beattie has just became the new acting president of, has entire courses instructing NGOs how to start rent-a-riots, how to shut down highways and block traffic. It's one thing when you have First Amendment protected freedom of assembly. Obviously, the right to protest is sacrosanct in this country. But what you have out of Norm
And
Eisen's
Mike,
shop...
I'm going to do what the audience is going to get really mad at me for. We're coming up against a break. It's not up to me, but I'm going to hold you through because I want to expand on that and how this also comes back to declaring elections as critical infrastructure. I think it's also interesting throughout that democracy playbook document, USAID is mentioned, I think, what is it, like a dozen times. And I remember that they actually make the key point, which is that USAID was so essential, not just for the censorship. I even think we saw that in the Declassified, I think it was also by DNI Tulsi, but Biden's censorship plan. But that sort of on the counterpoint or the foil to that was that USAID, as Norm sort of wrote, was going to be a key component of the proactive media coverage to sort of depict President Trump as an autocrat, which frankly I think explains a lot of the apoplexy over the dismantling of USAID in the early days of the Trump administration, because that was going to kind of be ground zero, right, for the resistance. You can pick up where you left off, but last point, because I like to just give you time so the audience doesn't get mad at me, but talking about how they've also declared elections critical infrastructure. Obviously, Norm has played, a key role in a lot of the election litigation, but even in the democracy playbook, there's a bizarre section where they talk about wanting to bring in international election observers somehow affiliated with the EU into the United States to endorse weird standards of transparency and openness and equality and all these sort of nebulous terms that I think you and I in the audience know all too well are frequently misappropriated to just basically usher in censorship or just, Democrat wins. But I'm curious your kind of broader analysis.
Yes, 37 times. The Democracy Playbook 2025 by Norm Eisen references USAID 37 times and includes the power of USAID to fund media allies for the Blob. They cite USAID's role in supporting groups like the Corruption Reporting Project in Ukraine, which ended up indirectly kicking off the 2019 Trump impeachment by trying to dig up dirt on Rudy Giuliani using U.S. taxpayer funds to do so, and then using that as part of the basis for the Trump impeachment. USAID has been the Norm Eisen playground. It's been the Norm Eisen slush fund to run money to media organizations, to street protesters, to bribe governments in order to control the prosecutors. We saw, for example, the $1 billion USAID loan guarantee, which was weaponized by Vice President Joe Biden to remove Viktor Shokin, who was investigating Burisma. And it's no surprise that Norm Eisen was representing the federal employees trying to stop the shutdown of USAID through the AFL-CIO lawsuit against the Trump administration. Norm Eisen also led the cabal with the lawsuits against shutting down the State Department's Global Engagement Center. This is a State Department USAID NATO network, and this is why you see the references to the EU all over this as well. The EU has the biggest censorship tool in human existence at its fingers now, as just July 1st, just over a month ago, their code of practice on disinformation became mandatory. And the goal of it is to control the speech within America by forcing companies to either censor speech in America that the EU says, or lose 550 million customers of those social media companies in the EU. Norm Eisen knows about this leverage. He was an integral part in the creation of these regulatory tools. He's had his eye on it for 8 years now at this point and works very closely with these same networks. On the point about the critical infrastructure, this was a legacy of Russiagate. On January 6, 2017, which was the real January 6, when something that actually changed and undermined a government was done. That was the day that the intelligence community assessment, giving the intelligence community imprimatur to saying that Russia hacked our elections and Russia stole the 2016 election. Just an hour after that came out, the Department of Homeland Security under Barack Obama designated elections, the metaphysical concept of elections, as critical infrastructure, giving the U.S. federal government jurisdiction over elections, which it had not had in 2.5 centuries. Elections were always controlled by the state governments. All 50 states, both Democrats and Republicans, all 50 state Secretary of States opposed outgoing DHS Secretary Jed Johnson's designation of elections as critical infrastructure, giving DHS the power to essentially control and administer the voting machines used in all 50 states, as well as a variety of other election processes. Why do we still have elections designated as critical infrastructure when we know this only happened because of the lie that Russia stole the 2016 election, and so we need a federal government to defend against this phantom Russia threat? This was something all 50 states opposed. The only reason that the states ended up coming on board with it was for 2 reasons. You had the first DHS secretary. Trump ended up firing 6 different DHS secretaries during the first 4 years of his first term. But the initial DHS secretary ratified it before he became the White House chief of staff, and they paid the states to go along with it. They opened up a giant $100 million slush fund to pay the state Secretary of State offices if they worked with the Department of Homeland Security and essentially got rid of their objection. So we pay a federal government office to usurp the control of elections held by states, and then we pay for another federal government slush fund to bribe the states to go along with it. We're talking now about getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. This is state-sanctioned waste, fraud, and abuse. It has to be undone immediately. The last thing that I'll say is that we were talking before the break about the need for USAID files and State Department files and U.S. Institute of Peace files on the connective tissue between the illegal conspiracies carried out by Norm Eisen's group when they engage in illegal protest activity. Now, legal protest activity is obviously protected under the First Amendment, but when you see things like what happened in Minneapolis in 2020 and across the country in the summer of 2020, or you see what was done in Los Angeles, the ICE riots, there is a concept promoted by the same State Department, USAID, U.S. Institute of Peace networks that Norm Eisen works with called strategic non-cooperation. And by that, they mean non-cooperation with the state. Through that concept, they engage in illegal activities, such as the shutting down of critical infrastructure, the shutting down of critical highway and transport lanes in order to bring a government to its knees. This is not the same thing as First Amendment protected protests, where you're simply marching on public property with signs. This is effectively a form of domestic terrorism to shut down highways and shut down trade so that people, mothers pregnant in their cars, can't get to a hospital, so that people can't get to work. This is an organized conspiracy when it's planned ahead of time. And you'll see Norm Eisen's fascination with declaring every protest spontaneous is specifically because he knows where his own weaknesses are. To the extent that these protests, the illegal aspect of them, the violence, the provocation with police, the shutdown of highways, I believe these need to be prosecuted criminally. And every government document in the federal government's possession about the coordination and organization of illegal shutdowns of American cities has to now be made public. I believe there needs to be a interagency transparency team. It can be led by the White House National Security Council. It should have representatives from investigators at the State Department, from the Legacy USAID function, from the U.S. Institute of Peace, from the Pentagon Civil Military Branch. And it should have a committed focus on disclosing all of the names, all of the manuals, all of the white papers, all of the emails, all of the text messages, all of the third-party contractors that have been used to support this rogue criminal network for the past 10 years. I think that will go a long way towards restoring international trust in American diplomatic organs, and it will be something that can be used as a reference guide for the entire American citizenry 100 years from now to understand how their own government works with these outside blob organizations like Norm Eisen shop in order to control the streets and bring a country to its knees.
200 days down, it sounds like we got some nice marching orders for the outstanding, 3 years and 165 days. Mike Benz, we got to drop you. We got other news to get to, though I think you and I could probably talk for hours. Where can people go to follow you and stay up to date with everything you're working on?
Follow me on X at Mike Benz Cyber. I'm also on Rumble and YouTube.
37 mentions. I like how you knew that off the top of your head with regard to USAID.